Thanks for coming out for a Saturday morning yin yang. So this is going to be a little more on the inside than the yang side. A little more calm. I woke up with a big headache, and sometimes inversions like downward dog make that worse. So I'm going to avoid that. I also am getting a lot more interference from my furry coworkers. One is just off the view screen, who is about to get herself into all kinds of trouble, or get me into trouble, which is probably more like it. I can put things out, they can sit out for a week, no one touches them, and then when I'm actually videotaping, suddenly those things are really interesting. Hold on. Taking her down is not necessarily going to work. It's not necessarily going to work, but maybe we'll distract her enough to reroute her curiosity. In any case, welcome to Yoga with Ferrets. So I'm going to start with a butterfly pose. I'm going to do mine reclining with an elevated back. So I'm going to put my back on this pillow. Now, if you have a blanket, but you don't have a pillow, you could certainly fold a blanket or roll a blanket up. If you've got nothing, you can do just lay down on your back, or if you'd rather, you can do a butterfly folding forward. So if that one sounds like a better plan to you, you can do that way. So the butterfly means that we put the feet together and the knees are open like little butterfly wings, and then recline backwards. Oh goodness. And see what happens. So I have to always kind of play with the alignment of my body on these different objects. So if I'm using a block, I prefer that way up high. Pillows are somewhere in between depending on how firm the pillow is. So I'm feeling, like this one needs to go up a little higher. And then sometimes with the blanket, I can get, put the end of the blanket really close to my hips. So you just want to find the alignment that feels appropriate for you. Using whatever objects you have around you that are nice and, comfortable for laying over. A beach towel, a throw pillow, whatever you got, a grassy lawn, whatever your story is. And then we'll pause for a few minutes. Now with the yin is a little slower. We're going to stay in poses a little longer. And the object of the game is to get to a place where we feel sensation. So like I'm feeling this stretch right through my inner thigh. I'm feeling this kind of back bendy fish shape that I'm doing. I'm aware of those things, but it's not so intense that I'm tightening up around it. So I don't feel tension in my face. I'm not experiencing any tension in my shoulders. Where, like the kind of hunching up toward the ear sort of tension. So you just monitor your body, and if you find that like parts of your body, like your face, that aren't really required to hold the muscles in a certain position, are soft. Often that's just something that we do unconsciously. We just hold tension in our bodies in general, especially if you're more prone to anxiety states or TMJ, or, anything that's kind of a product of excess stress. But sometimes it's because the pose is too intense. It's it's a learning process to differentiate, but in all cases, soften your face. Let your teeth part a little bit. Let the breath get a little deeper and a little slower, a little more smooth. If you find you can't hold that, then the pose is probably too intense. What I like about yin is it gives us time to explore the breath, explore letting go inside of a yoga pose. It's like a little mini meditation. So we're going to stay with this guy for about 2 more minutes. going to take a nice big inhale. And then we're going to unwind this pose. So first I'm going to start with the legs. And for me, just bringing the knees together feels nice. And then, because I have something under my back, I'm going to roll to the side and slip that guy out. Now, we're going to do a little reclining twist. So if you were doing the seated version, when you're ready, you can just roll down onto your back, and we'll do that next pose this way. So I like to take a few moments after each pose, especially in yin classes, just to, and I might do like a series of poses and then take the little moment, but it feels nice to just notice the impacts of the poses and impacts of how we practice, so that as we're going along, if things feel a little bit tender or sore, we can kind of take care of those parts of our body. So I'm going to take my legs over to one side, but before I get to that, I just am noticing kind of like, is one hip a little different than the other? Does one part of my spine feel a little bit more tender or a little bit more in need of care than another? And if I don't notice anything, then cool, you just proceed. But if there's anything that you might be like, oh yeah, maybe the back of my right hip is a little sore today, then you can add some extra support or go more slowly into poses on that side. So in any case, when you're ready, we're going to take the legs over to one way or the other. I'm going to start by going to the right with my legs. It doesn't matter really which direction you go in first. And I've got this blanket here just to support my bottom leg so that I can take the top leg and kind of wrap it around. And some people can hook their foot underneath the calf muscle. I don't get quite that close. So just wrapping it over gives me a little bit more tug along the IT band or outer hip, and then a little bit more of a tug through the pectoralis muscle that connects the breastbone to the arm bone here. And so I'm stretching everything on my left side. Now I can turn my head to the right, straight up in the center, or turn it to the left, whichever one seems like the better option. I usually just try to find a spot that feels like my neck muscles can relax, so I can concentrate on this kind of spirally twist on the left side. And that, my saying that that's where I feel it does not necessarily negate anything that you feel on your body. So wherever you feel it is where it is. Take nice deep breaths and just kind of settle in. Stay with this guy for one more minute. I'm kind of getting a little bit more active here for the last few breaths. Kind of just drawing my left hip just a little bit further away from my rib cage, because I've settled here long enough. There's kind of a sense of some softening that's happened. If that's not true and this is still really spicy, then don't do those little extra bits. We're going to take one more big breath here, and then we'll come back to the center with that top leg. And again, I'm just going to take a moment, because twists ask the spine to move in a kind of unique way. I mean, you know, not unique to the spine, but, you know, maybe slightly, I don't spend a lot of time in a twist on a daily basis. I turn and then I come back, but hanging out with a twist is kind of weird. So it takes a second for the spine to kind of redistribute all the fluid. So give yourself at least 30 seconds to kind of check in. Ooh. What's interesting to me is like it feels like my left leg's a little longer than my right leg. So there's been some sense of release in the tissue, even if I were to actually measure, I would not find a difference between the two. It's interesting to kind of feel that or notice that. So, feeling pretty good about this. So I'm going to try and do the other side and see how things go. And if I need to back off a little bit, I will. Okay. So kind of finding our way into this guy. And then we'll hang out for a little bit. And again, so this side for me is a little bit tighter. Good morning. How are you this morning? She's got stuff to do. She has an agenda. She wanted me to know that she was here because she didn't go that way into the room. She slid underneath me into the room. But still has no time for me. This is how it goes around here. I don't know how your furry coworkers behave, but in any case. So as this kind of pose gently unfurls, again, near the end, I'll add a little bit of pressure, but for now I'm just relaxing into the shape. So we're getting it to that like last little bit here, last 4 or 5 breaths. So I'm just adding that little bit of extra length on. On this side I don't have nearly as much room to make that happen, so it's just the barest little bit of extra. Just moving my ribs and hip away from each other. So take one more breath, and then we're gonna slowly come all back to the center. And take a moment to kind of jiggle out of that. Now, we are gonna wind up sitting for a moment, and we'll do some little things for our neck, but before we get to that, you may want to do just a moment of like a little back massage, or if you want to do some little cat-cow things, you can do those. So I will meet you in about, I don't know, 45 seconds, a minute. in a seated position. Once you get to a seated position, then we're going to take a moment. So I'm going to take the chin and drop it down, and then notice where the shoulder blades live. So I want, rather than let them kind of roll forward or hunch forward with me, I want to let them stay kind of behind me. And I'm going to just double check that I'm still kind of balanced, rib cage over hips. Then I'm going to roll my head up until I feel a stretch going on right there. So I'm on the right side, so I'm going to go between this stretch and this stretch up the back of the neck. So I'm going to take this left arm and reach it out to the side, and then and this is where it gets tricky, because sometimes I'll tense up the other side. So without tensing the other side up, I'm going to see if I can alternate between these two muscles that hold the neck onto the spine and really onto the body, because we've got this muscle holds the collarbone to the skull, and then this muscle holds the shoulder blade to the skull. So as I draw the collarbone out and the shoulder blade down, I'm adding a little extra length on that side without getting pinchy on the inside edge. Definitely feeling a little tender in this area today. So now I'm gonna take the like my arm kind of back, and I'm gonna let my head float up. Oh, just take the pressure away, really. And before I do the other side, just doing a little movement in the shoulders helps. Okay, and then I just pause for a moment and see, does it feel like I did a good thing for myself? I feel like I did some damage. This feels pretty good. Like, it feels like the shoulder's a little lower, like I've released a little bit of tension. So I'm going to drop my chin, I'm going to roll my head over until I feel that stretch in the front, reach my right arm out, and kind of draw the shoulder blade and the collarbone out. And then I'm just going to alternate between those two stretches. And they don't have to be intense to be useful, especially in this area. A lot of nerves and rather large vein and artery areas that go through this portion of the neck. So we can be kind here. There's lots of different ways to stretch these. This is just today's way. It's kind of a dynamic, in motion stretch. You can also hold them for a little while. Alright, so I'm going to bring my arm back. I'm going to get my head back in place. And jiggle the shoulders a little bit. Alright, so we're going to do some little lungy shapes, and this is why if you didn't get your little cat-cows in and you want to do that next, you can do that. And then I'll give you some options for turning it into more of a flow in between sides if you like. So we're going to start with a kneeling lunge. And if you like some extra padding under your knee, you can certainly add that. And we'll start with the left side, right leg forward, just because I think it's easier to see what I'm up to. So I'm going to start out with a supported position. So I'm going to use these two blocks, and I'm going to keep my torso a little bit more forward, right? So you could also start with your torso a little more lined up over your hip. So either one of those would be fine. So with my torso a little bit more forward, so my chest is resting pretty close to my thigh, I'm going to straighten my front leg out just a little bit, right? Just enough to feel like I'm on the edge of a hamstring stretch. And then I'm going to move my hips forward until I feel the hip flexor stretch in the back. So because I'm lower with my torso, I'm going to go a little further forward before I feel that. When I get up a little higher off the torso, I feel it a little earlier. So I'm doing, again, just a little bit of a dynamic situation here, back and forth. Then we're going to hold. So I'm going to come forward and decide how to hang out here. So again, you could do a little more of a lift. I'm going to eventually take this down lower. So I'm going to start with both hands to the inside, turning my right foot out a little. And that is where I shall begin. And then ultimately, while I hang out with this shape, I'm going to get down a little lower. But you don't have to go any lower, because lower sounds like a bad idea. Props just to make it so that I can get down into this lower shape and still not cause trouble for myself. I know there are limits. I don't necessarily want to exploit all of the limits. So here we are. Ready, we're going to back this guy up. And now I'm still kind of aiming into the hamstrings, but now because I'm more on a diagonal, I'm feeling that a little more around the center. If I brought myself a little closer around to the outside, I would feel it more in the outside hamstrings. So you're just kind of finding a stretch that seems interesting to you. So I am going to swing my right leg all the way back and just pause for a moment in a child's pose. But this is where you could, if you wanted to, throw in a bit of a vinyasa. So you could go back to down dog and then do a cobra or a plank and then a cobra and then an up dog or you know, whichever version of that you want, and then back to down dog. And then you could step your other foot forward and pause there for a moment. Oh, and now that I've talked you through that, I'm just going to stop for a moment, about 3 more breaths. Oh. Maybe hang out with down dog. And then we'll bring the opposite leg forward and work with the lunge that way. Oh. Okay, so hopefully that gives you enough variations to be happy about life while I am nursing a headache. So here we are. I'm going to find my blocks again. So again, I'm going to stay relatively low with my torso. Starting out, just kind of finding that sensation of the beginning of a hamstring stretch, not too intense, and then coming forward and feeling the hip out. I need to readjust a little bit here. So just back and forth between the kind of edges of that, not going all the way to an extreme. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Just to the edges. all the way in. So, I don't know why, but I just went all the way in there. So now we're going to pause with whatever version of lunge is right for you. Oh goodness. I did more of a stair step on the last side, but this side, just I'm going all the way into the deep. Which may or may not be appropriate for anyone other than me. I'm not even sure if it's appropriate for me. We're just all learning out here, yogis. Holy moly. So I'm staying here for, around a minute and a half or so. Somewhere in that neighborhood. And then we'll back it off and do the other side of this little shape trajectory. We'll do the little hamstring side of it. So I'm going to take a couple more breaths. Bring ourselves slowly back. And again, I'm going to kind of stay more on this diagonal because of giving this kind of inner portion of the hamstrings a little bit more love. Feels better some days. And I spent a lot of time with the other side of my hamstrings yesterday. So today it's kind of nice to come into the inside. Okay, so again, we're going to spend about 3 more breaths here, and then if you wanted to, you could take yourself through a little vinyasa sequence to kind of make this a little more on the yang side than the yin. So I'm going to let this guy sweep back. One more time, I'm going to take a little child's pose, and then I will join you in a standing pose. Standing mountain pose. I'm not sure that was audible. I'm going to get into a mountain pose in a minute, but I'll let you finish your vinyasa, me finish this pose. You might want to hang out with down dog for a couple breaths. This is kind of my child's pose sometimes becomes like my down dog when I'm not feeling like being upside down dog. It's just kind of a nice little landing pad. So, I'm trying to get myself off the floor without dipping my head too low. And then, standing upright again. Eventually, hopefully you'll meet me here. And we'll do some other things. So we're going to find a mountain pose that feels like it's kind of balanced between the 2 feet. So we're going to get out of balance to start with. So kind of rocking the weight into the toes and picking up the heels, and then rocking the weight into the heels and picking up the toes without, of course, falling over in either direction. And just kind of feeling out how we're standing on our feet. And then we're going to try to find I'm just sort of gently narrowing that movement pattern and finding the spot where front to back the weight feels evenly distributed between the ball mound of my foot and the heel of my foot, with the toes able to spread out and press lightly into the floor without gripping, right? So if I'm out of balance, my toes will generally grip. So finding that balanced place, and it might feel like there's a little sense of forward leaning or a little sense of backward leaning, so we're just looking for that most balanced place. And letting the arms relax. And so once again, we're going to kind of shift ourselves out of balance by taking the left leg and bringing it in front of the right. So I'm going to bend my right knee, kind of a baby version of the chair pose. You can put your left shin across the right shin, or you can put your left shin up on top of your right thigh, right? So it's a little more of a kind of pigeony shape. And then you can hold the chair with whatever arm position seems like a good idea. You want to deepen the hip, you can certainly try that. You might knock yourself over. So I'm going to pick up this left leg and I'm going to step myself back into what's going to be a warrior two. My mat's a little bit slippery unless it's damp, so I'm going to do that first. And then I'll join you guys with a warrior two. I put pumpkin spice aromatherapy oils into my spray bottle so that I could have pumpkin spice mat situation. So hopefully your house smells delightful as well. So I'm gonna again kind of do this back and forth action. So I'm doing a little reverse warrior, noticing where it kind of starts to pull on my leg, doing this little side angle, just allowing this length to happen down the side. Trying not to fall over. Or trying to not fall over. That might be the right assembly of words. Okay, so now I'm going to straighten out the front leg, and I'm going to go into and out of a triangle a few times. And sometimes I use a block under my hand. Right now I'm kind of into just pressing my hand into my shin. Using it to play with the angles of the hip. There's no, some people have had some really interesting notions around triangle pose about trying to draw this bottom hip underneath. But that can cause some really interesting damage to your hip, or, turn your knee out, or make your spine do weird things. So I'm not clear that that's a good notion. I think creating some space in the body and it feeling good is way better than any notions you may have around tucking a hip under. I mean, hips. Hips are generally fairly strong, fairly, intensely well-fortified joints. But as we get older, they get a little more sensitive. So in any case, if you feel pressure in your hip socket, you probably should change things up. Okay, so I've come out of this shape. You could go out of this shape going into downward dog, do a plank, lower down, do your up dog, come back to down dog, and finish that vinyasa. Because we're all going to meet up in this mountain pose again. And then once you get to the mountain pose, kind of finding that balance again, but then notice too if there's any asymmetry, right? So my right side feels a little different than my left. Even once I've gotten everything feeling kind of balanced. So I think it's interesting and fun to observe. Okay, so again, I'm sending myself into this little baby chair. I'm going to bring this other leg up on top. You can put the leg across the shin instead of on the thigh, especially if it bothers your knee at all. Work with the balance. Okay, so I'm going to pick this knee up, and then I'm going to step myself back. Catch a warrior two. And then just kind of, again, feel this thing out. Right, so if I try to square my hips forward like that, something's got to give. And so my knee falls inward. I just let the hip find its sort of natural place, and I put the feet in a position that feels good and solid and steady, then I don't have any of that kind of pressure or weirdness that builds up in the hip socket. And to me, that feels like a better, more whole approach to this whole situation. This idea of torquing my body through some weird shapes I don't do every day. Well, I do them every day, but not to make coffee or cook a meal or mop the floor. None of these yoga poses show up in that particular regard. I have to make myself do them. All right, so then we're going to take ourselves into triangle, and kind of finding some space. I'm not disparaging these shapes, by the way, I love them. But they're weird. Oh. And again, so I'm really gently kind of playing with going in and out of this shape, kind of straightening the leg and bending it. I adjusted my arm position because that felt more interesting. So just allow yourself a little bit of exploration. You feel like you've got a nice spot, we'll just stay put. And again, I'm mostly keeping my head sort of level with my hips here because I've got I've got a little issue today with pounding in my skull. But you could take yourself back to downward dog and throw your vinyasa in right there and make it a little bit more of a journey. And then you can join me back up here at the top of your mat with a mountain pose when you're finished with that. And again, taking a moment just to notice my arrangement in mountain pose and feeling where it lands me. So I'm going to do a squat. So a squat means you put your butt lower than your knees. That's the idea. I get as close to that as possible. So you are just going to work it out. So I need my feet wider. I need to turn them out a little bit so that I have any hope of dropping my hips down. So for some people, they can have the legs really close together and the hips come all the way to the heels. And so you just squat as much as your body says is cool to squat. We're all from the US, and we do not squat in general after the age of probably 5. I don't know. I think we've been taught to sit in chairs. It's not necessarily good for our hips, probably, but it is what it is, as the case may be. In this case, you know, the damage has been done. Now I can kind of slowly, I've been working with squats for years, and they slowly get better, and if I do them a lot, then they really do get better. Now, you might be able to just sit down. I'm going to need to do a little bit more of an arrangement here. So once you're seated, we're going to take one version of a shape. So I'm going to start with my legs a little on the wider side, but not necessarily as wide as I can go. And then I'm going to keep them that way, but you can bend one knee while we do one side, and then bend the other knee while we do the other side if you like. Okay, so it might be helpful to sit on the edge of a blanket. I am going to roll this blanket up and put it under my knees because that is helpful to me. And then once you get settled, you're going to find your head balanced over your hips again. Now, for some of us, the pelvis wants to lean backwards. So if that's the case, you can try a more narrow shape, so the legs come in much tighter, or you can add more blankets underneath your hips. And elevating the hips sometimes will allow the pelvis to find a stable place. Now, I'm going to turn towards one leg, and in this case, I'm turning towards my left leg. There's a tendency when I get to the point where my spine is done twisting, my hips will help, and this right hip will lift to kind of push me over. So what I'm trying to do is keep that hip settled, right? So only twist as much as my spine is willing to twist, and not ask the pelvis to help. There are some exceptions to this rule. So, if you have sacroiliac problems, you want to be mindful about twisting. Now, in this case, I still recommend, just twist a little bit. A little bit of twist is going to be fine. Don't try to pull yourself into a deeper space. But in some instances, really the pelvis needs to come with the hips for some of the kinds of twists. With this particular twist, because it's an open, seated twist and pretty mild, just notice if there's any pressure there and maybe back yourself off a little bit. Don't cause trouble. There's been this little
gone out into the ferret group consciousness that says we should knock over furniture and mess with things we've been leaving alone for the last month. Today, because the human's not filming, we're gonna do 2 more breaths here. It's possible that this is some elaborate ferret protest against the lack of treats this morning. All right, so folding forward over this leg, and this is that point where you could fold, bend the other knee. And you can also, if you want, do this as a side bend instead of as a forward bend. So depending on what your particular tight places are today, you can adjust. So I'm going to play with my spine a little bit. So I'm letting myself kind of round over and lean a little bit into in this case I'm going left, so my right hip, and then kind of lift up and let that right hip go with me a little bit. So I'm just playing with this shape. Right now I'm exaggerating a little bit, so hopefully you can see it, but really it's fairly subtle comparatively speaking. I'm just allowing a little bit of movement in the hip. Ugh. What was that? Oh, you broke something. Oh, great. Go do something else, please. Now she's going to come bother you guys. If we lose the camera feed, you'll know what happened. All right, so I'm coming up. Oh. So you might straighten out that leg if you were bending it. Finding kind of a place in the center. We're going to go straight down the middle. Now you can bring both feet in and do more of a butterfly shape if you wanted to. And you don't really even have to go that far forward. You can just lean in a little bit if that seems interesting. I'm going to stay with this guy for about 4 more breaths. Inhale, come all the way up. And then I'm going to do the same thing going the other way. So I'm starting with the twist. Just turn over one leg. And again, not going anywhere, just kind of noticing where the inclination for the pelvis to help versus me just being able to pause here, where that inclination is. What happens if I energize the legs? What happens if I let them relax a little bit more? So hanging out here for just a bit. dive in to this, and this is where it could be a side bend, or you could bend this other leg. Stay here for just a little bit more, about 4 more breaths. And again, I'm just kind of getting into that dynamic end here. And coming straight back up. And then one more time, just for a little bit, going straight down the middle. So again, you can choose something a little bit different here. Nice big breath. Alrighty, so you have some options. First option, of course, is to bring the knees in. And give yourself a little rinse, especially if you just spent that whole time with the legs all the way straight, like I did. Then we're going to take ourselves into a final relaxation shape. Now that final relaxation shape could be Shavasana, which is what I'm going to do, with a little bit of support, a little blanket under my head, and a little pillow under my knees. But you could also do something like legs up the wall, or if you don't have a wall, you can spend portion of your time with your legs just in the air, or you can put a block underneath your hips and support yourself that way. I keep hearing the sound of things being broken around me, which might just be the theme of the day. So I'm going to try to ignore all that stuff for now and hope that it doesn't go horribly, horribly awry. Oh, there are days, y'all. There are days where I need Shavasana more than other days. Things. Let yourself settle into whichever kind of, more relaxing shape you can find. Might be. Some people may prefer to lay on their side or on their belly and not on the back, and that's okay too. Just finding a place where your body can really let go and relax is the primary purpose of the last pose. So the nervous system really gets to just shift into that parasympathetic relaxed space.
moment just to notice the environment around you. You can even do so with your eyes closed, just sort of listening to the sounds that are available. Maybe there's some bird song or sound of a little breeze here or there. Maybe it's the sound of small creatures munching on dry kibble. It's hard to know. Sound of your neighbor honking at someone. It's just whatever those sounds might be. And then you can sort of invite yourself to take your eyes into the picture. Notice whatever's above you, the sky or your ceiling. And then you can start to kind of jiggle or wiggle the fingers and toes. And the wrist and ankles. Yourself a little moment to sort of transition, so maybe a little back massage or some little windshield wiper legs or happy baby or something like that. And then bring yourself to a seated position at some point. Thanks for joining me, putting up with this ridiculous nonsense that's been happening around here. That's why I can't have nice things. We're going to take a nice big breath together. Nice big inhale. And a big deep Namaste, yogis.